All right. Well, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. Let me try to get my screen shared here. All right. You should be able to see a full screen that is just, oh, I can see it now. It's starting to come up. All right. Now this is where I can't see. So are you able to see a full screen that looks like a slide?
Yes.
Okay. Keynote and presenting on Google Meet or even Zoom is a little strange because I can't see what I'm sharing necessarily. Well, thank you again for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. It is, I know it's in the evening for you all. It's about 2 p.m. for me. So I am in my element and not tired, but I hope everyone is able to relax and have a drink at the end of their day there of whatever it is you prefer to drink. A little bit about me before I get started. I am, as we were discussing just a few minutes ago, I'm the maintainer of the Ramsey UUID library. I am also a release manager, or one of the release managers for PHP 8.1. And if you have any questions about that later, after the talk, I would be happy to talk about that. I am also a co-organizer of the Nashville PHP user group, and I'm a staff engineer at Skillshare. I've also been doing PHP for about just over 20 years now, so I have been around for quite a long time. And speaking of being a release manager, tomorrow is when 8.1 comes out and its first beta release. So keep your eye out for that. And if you're interested, there are resources at php.net for how to download and test it on your own, and even submit QA reports back to the project. So if that's something you've been interested in, check that out. And you can go ahead and start taking a look at some of the early features that will be in PHP 8.1. This is also feature freeze. So everything that is in this beta 1, all the features are the features that will be in the general availability release later this year. And that release comes out late November. So I want to talk today about the title of the talk is Cool Tools for PHP Development, but really the thing I want to center in on and zero in on is developer experience. It's something we call DX. Developer experience has really come up in the industry in recent years as a term that gets batted around a lot. And we often hear developer relations people talking about DX. We might talk about it even among our own teams. Different communities focus on it as well. I think that in my mind, the one community I see focusing on DX a lot is the JavaScript community. So there's a lot of focus on creating good tools and good tooling for how to build software and how to write software. So this is a term that's like kind of come to my attention only in the most recent of years, but it goes back at least 8 or 9 years when I was able to find some people who had started talking about it in papers. And here's a paper I found from, let's see, the International Conference on Software and System Process. I'm not going to read this entire quote to you, but back then they were starting to flesh out a definition for what developer experience meant. And this was the definition that this paper came up with, that it consists of experiences relating to all kinds of artifacts and activities that a developer may encounter as part of their involvement in software development. It could be divided into 3 main areas: the development infrastructure, how developers feel about their work, and then how they see the value of their contribution. So you can see on this diagram that came out of the same paper they've split it up into these three main regions. The cognition one is how you perceive the infrastructure. So this talks about the platform and the skills and the procedures. The how you feel about your work is more about kind of like the affect of the work, the affection toward the work. And this is the really social area, how it plays into your experiences on a team, how you relate to your team members. And then how you see the value of your contribution really kind of plays into like the intention and your motivations for development and your commitment and your alignment to your team's purpose. But today, while I think all three of these things are really interesting and important to consider when we talk about developer experience, today the one that I really want to focus on is the infrastructure part, how you perceive the infrastructure. And this also ties into a little bit about how you feel about your work. So they're interrelated, but what we're really going to focus on are the tools that you use to get the job done. And that's all about the infrastructure. So I've just covered these things, but the three things of the developer experience framework are cognition, conation, and affect. And we're going to really focus on how do you perceive the infrastructure. So some things that some questions that you might ask yourself are, do your tools get in the way? Are they a joy to use? And I think that the better experience that you have as a developer with your tools, the more efficient and happy you'll be. And as I was doing research on this talk, I came across other papers that show this and kind of prove that better tools lead to a more efficient developer experience. So cool tools. Well, other than a rhyming couplet of words, what are cool tools? When I'm talking about cool tools in this talk, I'm talking about these are the tools that you need to do your job. These are the tools that will make your job easier. And possibly they're the tools that bring joy to your work. And that sounds like a really odd statement. Like why would I think about joy as part of software development? But I think that that's an important thing for anyone's job is, can you take some joy in what you're doing? And the tools that we use can affect that. They can affect how we feel about the work we're doing. And it might even be as simple as things that I used to kind of, make fun of, and I'm trying not to anymore, but I still find them a little funny, is the use of emoji in your tools or the use of colors. So these are things that are really simple. They look like they don't have an effect on your work, but they really can affect how you feel about the tools that you're using. So I think that they're just as important to consider when you're talking about tools. So our focus is how can you create better workflows for the tools that you already use? What we're going to talk about is taking all these tools that we have as part of our toolboxes and figuring out like how can we put them together in ways that make us more efficient? Because programming is a team sport. So I have a workflow and I have other team members working in the same source code, and it would benefit us all to use the same workflows. So how can we share them with our team? And in other words, how can we improve the developer experience of working on our team? Or if you're an individual, even the experience that you have as an individual developer. So you'll see a little bit in a few minutes of what I mean by that, because an individual developer, you're not always working in the same repository, you're working across repositories. Teams are very similar. You're working across repositories, but a lot of the workflows don't change. A lot of them stay the same from repo to repo. So how can you improve your DX, whether you're on a team or whether you're by yourself? So that takes us to a live coding portion of this talk, which is always really interesting, even for virtual presentations. Most people shy away from live coding, but not me. I like to just jump in and fail in front of everyone. That was a joke, but I can't hear audience laughter, so I will assume that there is a laugh track. All right, let me, I do want to share an individual window first. So let me jump over. Google Meet is going to be a little strange with this, so bear with me. All right, here we go. All right, everyone should be able to see my terminal screen. Let me bump up the text a little bit.
Yep, really looks good.
It. Okay. If you have trouble seeing anything, just let me know. I'll try to be better about it. The text is a little dark. It's kind of hard for me to see. Let me see. Oh, now I can see it a little better. So that shows up better. All right. I have put together a small repository here already ahead of time that has some basic files that are already in it. What I want to do is start kind of from the premise of a starting out project. And there are certain tools that I know that I use on every project. So we'll talk about those tools and we'll take a look at the workflow that I kind of do just manually here. So, and this is not a workflow that's vastly different from what everyone else does. This is close to a similar workflow that you're probably familiar with. So first of all, let's take a look at the repository I've got here. We can see that it's a standard kind of repo. Let me actually do it in this format. So it's a standard repository. I've already put a few things in here that I don't need to start out with necessarily, but they're here because I want to showcase, I don't want my tools to fail later and me have to like live code that because I have done that before. So I've got things already in place. This is kind of like a baking show where I've already got certain ingredients together ahead of time, right? So what we can see though is I've put together a PHP CS configuration file, a PHPStan, a PHPUnit, and a Psalm configuration file. I've already got, actually I don't need the composer lock file. I don't know why it's in there right now, but that's fine. We're going to install some things with Composer in just a few minutes. Actually, let me do one. Oh yes, okay. So I'm going to open up Composer. Oh, actually, I don't need to open up Composer. I'm going to install the tools. And before I install these, actually, let me take a moment to say I'm going to install PHPUnit, PHP Code Sniffer, PHPStan, and Psalm. I'll talk a little bit more in detail about what each of these tools does in a few minutes if you're not familiar with them, but I am installing them using Composer. Some of you might be familiar with other ways to install these tools. Some ways are a global installation. Other ways include something called FIVE, the FAR Installation and Verification Environment. It's an environment similar to Composer in that it allows you to manage these tools, but you manage them separately from your other dependencies in your project. I am not going over that kind of installation right now. There are different schools of thought on why you would use that over using Composer. But for the sake of example and simplicity, I am using Composer. So just in case you notice this and you say, hey, Ben, Sebastian Bergman advises not to use Composer to install PHPUnit. I am completely aware of that, but we will use it today, for example. So I have my Composer require line here to require these tools. So it downloads them all, installs them, adds them to composer.json, and now I have them ready to go. So these are, like I was saying, these are tools that I often use as part of general workflow for testing things and for ensuring that my code meets a certain level of quality. And so as I'm developing I might run these along with, as I make commits or as I push code. I might make them as part of my CI workflow. But if we're just talking about local development right now, we'll ignore the CI workflow and just focus on kind of how we run these tools. Well, one of the first ways we run them is we know that they're in our vendor bin directory. So I'm going to run PHPCS. This is PHP Code Sniffer. So yep, it executed against 2 files. They worked out great. Okay, I'm going to now run PHPStan, and I do like to run PHPStan and Psalm. Both of these tools are static analyzers. They'll look at my code and make sure that without even running it, does it meet the expectations of the code or the inferences that are in the code. So for example, PHP has type hinting, but there might be some more complicated things that I need to type, like generics. So I have an array that I'm returning, and I want to say it's only an array of strings. It can't be integers. So I'm able to type hint that using annotations, and PHPStan and Psalm will be able to see that, and it can say, oh, over here, it looks like you've added an element to that array that's not a string. So that's an error. So that's what a static analyzer will do. That's a very basic definition of what it does, but it gives you some idea if you're not familiar with that term. So I want to run PHPStan. Okay, PHPStan runs, it checks the types. I'm going to now run Psalm. And it runs and checks types, no errors found. And finally, I'm going to run my unit tests. I've got one unit test sitting in here, so it'll run and it passes. All right, so I've run all 4 of these things, but these are 4 things that I have to run a lot. So how can I combine them? Well, I can write a script that combines them. The other thing that's interesting here is that I have to type vendor bin all the time to get to these tools. That's a little cumbersome, and I want to be able to share this with the rest of my team too. I want to say, hey, just run this one command. Let's call it composer test. And when we run this command, it should always do the same things. Well, Composer allows us to do this. I open up my composer.json and scroll down. I'm not sure why it is me fresh. Okay, something got out of place in the buffer or something. All right, so I'm going to open my composer.json. If you're not familiar with it, Composer allows you to add a script section. So we're going to add scripts here at the bottom. It doesn't matter where it is necessarily. And scripts is an object. Why is my, okay, this is what happens when you do live coding. Scripts is an object where of key value pairs. So each property can be a string or an array. If it's a string, it can be a command line command, or it can be a fully qualified class name with a static method that it calls. It can also be an array of command line commands, together with PHP, static methods if you want. So we're going to create a property called test. Oops, I'm sorry, it's supposed to be an array. And I'm going to add the 4 commands that I normally run to this script. So I run PHP CS. And notice I don't have to put the path to vendor bin because Composer is smart enough to figure out that these are commands that it knows about, that has context about. So I've added these 4 commands, and I didn't pass any other arguments to them, although you can, if you want to, pass other arguments to these, we can do that, something like this. And now, when I run Composer test, it's going to execute all 4 of those in that order. So now I've taken these 4 things that I have to run a lot and have been able to put them together into one single command that I can access through Composer to run. Now, I can take this, because this is in my composer.json, I'm able to commit it to the repository. And when I do so, let's add this. Oops. Oh, I know what's going on. Goodness gracious, Ben, why did you do this? Hold on 1 second. I forgot to clean out my repository from the last time I ran this. All right, so we'll get to that CaptainHook thing in just a few minutes. So I'm able to commit this, and I'll say add composer test command to share with team. Okay, so now I've created a command, and I can push this up to the repository and share it with my team. If we look back at our composer.json, you can kind of get an idea here that we can now use this to add all sorts of other commands. You can even reference commands from within this. So let's just say, for example, that I want to take my PHPCS and put it somewhere else, and we'll just say, we'll call it style, and we'll say PHPCS, and we'll take out both of, these and call it analyze. Oh, I'll use an S since I'm giving a presentation to folks in Britain. Actually, Essex is in Britain, right? Did I say that correctly?
Yeah, you're right, Ben.
Okay.
Yeah, it is.
I don't want to offend anyone. All right. So we can add these 2 here, and we can create another one called unit. I don't know why we would create this separately, but maybe we do. All right, so now I'm able to go into my single test one, and I can reference these with an @ symbol. So @style references the style one I just created, @analyze references that one, and then @unit. So now I can actually come up here and do composer style and just run the one thing, or composer test, and it runs all of them again. So you can kind of get some idea here of the possibilities that you have when working with Composer scripts. You can go to the getcomposer.org website, and there's a whole section on scripts. They even have some that will allow you to hook into installation. So when you pull down a package or push a package back up, it will run certain commands. And we'll take a little bit of a look at that later. So now we have this idea of Composer scripts that we're able to share within a repository with our team. I don't know if you can hear in the background, my wife and son are getting ready to go somewhere, so I apologize. I've got these scripts, but they're limited to this single repository. But these are things that I do all the time. I do them across repositories. And, I might build up a workflow that I've agreed with my team that this is going to be the workflow that we use on all of our different projects. And now I have to copy paste this every time I go to create a new project. And that leads us to another concept here. Composer has the concept of scripts, but it also has a concept of plugins. So I want to show off a Composer plugin. To do so, I'm going to use a simple plugin that I created called Composer Repple. All right. And if we just take a look, I'll just show you kind of what this does first, and then I will show you some of the code behind it to show you really how small a plugin can be. It doesn't have to be a big thing, but it can be very powerful. If I type Composer list, you get a list of all the commands that Composer provides. If you've imported a plugin, a package that is a plugin, it will also include its commands in this list. And we can see that, kind of hard, I'll have to scroll up. We can see that right here though. It has this Repple command. And I have added this Repple command as part of the plugin. This is not part of Composer normally. Now a Repple is like a language shell. It stands for read, eval, print, loop, because it reads input, evaluates it, prints out the output from evaluating it, and then loops back around to wait on more input. And so if I run this, we'll see this is the SciShell that comes up by Justin Heilemann, and I'm not going to like go into everything about a REPL, but it's a really powerful tool here. And so you can see that my Composer plugin is not really anything that I did. It just adds this capability to Composer. So someone else did all the work, all the heavy lifting underneath it, and I just kind of came along and created a plugin to implement it. The nice thing about this, though, is if we exit out, I'll show you. The nice thing about this plugin is it hooks into the context of your project. And so the idea that I want to give you here is that when you create plugins, you have access to that context. So you can actually do special things for your project. You know about the classes that are in your project. So if we look back at, whoa, I didn't mean to do that. If we look back at, let's just look in the source directory. We have just one file here, example.php. It does something, whoops, it does something very simple, right? It greets someone. It takes a, actually, yeah, so someone pointed out Laravel uses SciShell. So the Laravel, the artisan tinker command uses SciShell under the hood. It's exactly the same thing. So this provides it. If you're not using Laravel, you're able to import this and make use of the same tool. So this class here just takes, it has one method on it, greet, and prints out hello, whatever, hello world, or hello, whatever you want to do. So if I open up Composer REPL, I can say example. I actually forgot what my namespace was, but I think it was Ramsey tools example. I forgot the new keyword, so let's go back and add it. All right, that's exactly what it was. So if I run greet, it runs it. So it knows about your code. It has access to the autoloader. You're able to make use of it. So that's what's really cool about the REPL, but that's also what's really cool about the plugin. So let's take a quick look at how the plugin works. What code is required to make a plugin work? You can find this in Composer's documentation, but I'm going to show you how it works with the Composer REPL that I've put together here. All right, ignore the security vulnerability that you see on screen. I'm aware of what this is, and it is hidden. If you go view this on GitHub, you don't see it. So pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. This is actually related to Composer had a vulnerability in it a few months ago, and in order to satisfy this security message, I have to bump the version of Composer in my Composer JSON up. The good news is, though, that the way that Composer works is when you Composer install or update your own package, Composer .lock file, should pick up the newer versions anyway. So this is my Composer REPL package. We're just going to take a quick look at some of the source code here. I don't really care to show how the REPL part works. I want to show you how the plugin part works. So we're going to look in this Composer directory, and the first thing we'll look at is the REPL command, and then we'll look at the plugin. The important thing to note here is that these commands are really the same thing as a Symphony command. If you've ever worked with a Symphony command, this is ultimately, this extends from that. So Symphony console command, if you're familiar with that, you'll be familiar here. Actually, I didn't need to show you this code. This is just the command. This is the command that executes that. What we do need to look at is the plugin, though. So this plugin implements several interfaces provided by Composer. And you can see that one is called capable, one's command provider, one's plugin interface. So I use all three of these to provide this plugin. The first thing is the capabilities one. So this plugin tells Composer it has these capabilities. And the capability is that it is a command provider. And the command provider is the current class. So it could be a different class. It could be, you could have multiple command providers. It's really just this one class that provides the command. This class also provides the command. So it has Git commands. It only has one command. That's the one we just briefly kind of glossed over. And that is, these are Symphony commands. Or they're actually Composer commands that extend from the Symphony console command. And then the last thing is plugin interface, which requires these three methods. They don't all have to do anything. In fact, a lot of times they don't have any body at all. In this case, though, I wanted to, when you activate it, I wanted to grab the Composer instance that's currently running so that I can pass that into my REPL command. That way, I'm able to gain access to the context of Composer. So this is it. This is the plugin. In a nutshell, there's two more things, though, that have to happen. For that, we go to our composer.json. The first thing is that the package needs to be a type composer-plugin. And then the second thing is that under this extra section, we want to tell it the name of our plugin class. And that's it. That's ultimately all it takes to create a plugin. And it's only a few lines of code, but we can then take all the things that we want, like new commands we want to provide to our team. And these are commands that can do things like what I just showed you, but can now be shared across all of our projects because we've made a central plugin package that we want to use for each of our projects. I will show this because I forgot to show this last time. If we go to packagist.org, you can search for Composer plugin. Actually, I'm sorry. I don't know if that's the right way to search for it, but if you look over here under package type, you can see that there's lots of different Composer plugin packages. So we can click on that, and now we're filtering over here by Composer plugin. So if we're looking for, I don't know, dev tools or something, hey, look, my name comes up first. I'm about to talk about that. These are all Composer plugins that are packages that you can use, and they provide different things. So we'll go back here, and I do want to show this DevTools one because it gives a larger idea of what a plugin can do for your team. And this is a little bit of how we do things at my company. We have a central repository that acts as our development tools that we use on all of our repos. All right, so going back over here, not Git. I have a plugin, a Composer plugin called DevTools that I'm going to require here. These are the tools that I like to use for my open source packages. This is something I've spent a lot of time working on just so that I can have common tools on all my open source packages. And the added benefit is that if I need to update how a tool works, I update it in one place, and then all of my other projects are able to take advantage of that. And that's something that I think is really important for efficiency on a team. There are things when you change the way you do something at an organizational level, like maybe your development team has gotten together and you said, hey, we're going to change the way we run unit tests, or we're going to change our coding standard a little bit. Now you've got to go update all your repositories for that. But if you use a plugin, then you're able to update one place and then roll it out to all of your repositories as you update them. So I'm going to require this package. This is definitely not a package you have to use, but it might be helpful as a starting point. Let's see. I'm going to say yes to all these. All right, I thought that would force them, so I need to fix that in the package. But we'll come back and talk about CaptainHook in a few minutes. So earlier I mentioned that when you type composer list, you get a printout of all the commands that Composer knows about, and including the ones that come in from any plugins that you're using. So if I type composer list, you can now see these are actually broken down by sub namespaces. So in Symphony console, any command that has colons in it will use those colons to separate namespaces. And we can actually take a namespace. So let's say, for example, this build one, if we say composer list build, now we're going to list all the commands in that namespace. See? So we get a shorter list. But if we go back to composer list, we can see that it's now got access to a bunch of commands that are all provided by this DevTools plugin. And the DevTools plugin, I decided that I wanted to see all of the commands kind of separate, and I've provided a way to do that. If you look at the DevTools, if you're interested in it, you can look at the README on the DevTools package, and it will kind of explain this. We can go add an extra section here. And I've already got it to copy paste to add a prefix to our command. This is something that I created as part of this plugin, and I think it's a really useful way to show that because plugins have access to Composer, to the context provided with Composer, you're able to have access to any part of composer.json, and you can use the extra section to place configuration for your plugin. So in this case, I have separated it by giving it, I've decided that anything under the name that is the same name as my package, Ramsey/DevTools, is going to be configuration values for this package. So I've added this here. This is part of the package, but it's something you can do with a Composer plugin. So now, when I say composer list, we can now see that there is now a dev namespace, and all of those commands are under the dev namespace. And I can do composer list dev and just see my commands. So we've now looked at how to create Composer scripts that are useful for a single repository. We've looked at a plugin to see how this is useful for sharing across repositories. And this plugin, in fact, actually, let me go back into our Composer JSON here. And I'm going to remove my scripts because I added these as part of the plugin, so I don't need these. So now if I do composer list dev again, you can see that I've got, let's see, dev test all. So I'm going to do that, composer dev. Actually, a really neat thing is if you have tab completion turned on, then it will pick up the commands that you have. So I now have this as part of my my plugin. It does the workflow that I want it to do in the order that I want it to do it, and now all of my team is able to make use of that. But it doesn't really enforce this workflow on your team. We can add it to our CI pipeline and force it after we push to the repository. But sometimes CI can take a while to run. And I've been there. I've been in situations where like it'll take 20 minutes or so to run. And that's 20 minutes that might result in a failure. And then I've got to go back, fix it, and then push again and let it run again. So that's wasted time. It's better for me to run the tests locally if I remember to before pushing, so I can catch that before it goes up into the CI pipeline and I haven't wasted, you know, quarter of an hour to a half hour. So there are ways we can do that with Git Hooks. If you're not familiar with Git Hooks, they are scripts that live inside the local Git repository on your machine in, you know, .git. So, or the Git database is another way of calling it. So this is the Git database. There's a hook section here, and it looks like this. These are already installed. I thought I removed them earlier, but oh, I just reinstalled them when CaptainHook installed. That's why. So I'm getting to that. So as part of your workflow, you can build it into your Git hooks so that your team doesn't even, you and your team don't even have to think about running them. They run on their own essentially when you make commits or before you make a push. So let's take a look at that. So in order to look at that, we're going to use CaptainHook. Now, CaptainHook was already part of the dev tools library that I just pulled down. So you saw it prompt me to install them. But another way to install it without using my dev tools library is to install the CaptainHook plugin. CaptainHook has a plugin for Composer. It's CaptainHook/plugin-composer. And by the way, all of this is going to be at the end of the talk. Like there are tons of links to these tools and many more. So don't worry about having to get it right now. So we can require this as a plugin. It installs it. And you can see here at the bottom, it says it's using this config. I already have a config in place. That way I am able to breeze through this a little quicker. So let's take a look at configuration. And I already have a few things in here. I'll talk about commit message in a minute, but let's just talk about pre-commit. So right now, I have defined one action that I want to happen when before a commit takes effect. So when I type git commit, I want this to run before the commit actually happens. And if there are any failure states from this, it will stop the process and then let me know that an error happened. So right now, all it does is echoes hello. So let's just take a look at how that works. Oh, another thing, I'll mention the commit message hook right now. This is a way that you can validate commit messages. So I have one action in here right now. This is an action that's provided by the CaptainHook library. And this uses the Beams method, named after, I believe his name is Chris Beams. There is a blog post he wrote about making good commit messages. And in that blog post, he outlines all of his rules for commit messages. And then a lot of people have taken that and built and codified it. So this is a way that the CaptainHook library, our package, has codified it using this message validation. So the only two things I've said are the subject length has to be less than 50 and the body line length is 72 characters. So we're not going to worry too much about that, but you'll see that at play here when I make this commit. So let's see, is there anything outstanding? So yes, let's add this. We'll stage it, say git commit. All right, it was very fast. I'll show it after I quit out of this, but it did say hello in the output there before it brought up the editor window. So I'm going to do something here. This is going to be against the Beams guidelines. I'm going to say updated stuff for now. So it failed, and I got a failure message. And so CaptainHook presents the failure message to me. And if we scroll up a little bit, you can see that pre-commit hook did execute hello and says done. Now, we don't actually see the output of the hello here because CaptainHook is kind of hiding that because we don't really need it. It's more for running tasks. So I echoed something here, but that's kind of a pointless thing to do. And then my commit message, this hook failed. And it found two problems. And then down here, it's telling me why. So the Beams validation is telling me that the subject line has to start with an uppercase letter and should be written in the imperative mood. So let's go commit again. And we'll say update stuff instead of updated stuff. Oh, it needs to be capitalized too. All right, so this is going to pass. So that is my Git hooks there have now enforced a way of doing things that when my team now downloads this repository, they're also going to follow the same rules because the CaptainHook hooks got installed automatically. There's actually a way to have them install really automatically for your team, so it doesn't even prompt them. And that is, let me go find that real quick. So if using the CaptainHook plugin, you can, oh, I'm looking at the wrong thing. Sorry, I'm pulling this up. This was something I thought to do just now off the cuff. Oh, well, I forgot where it is now. So I'll try to come back to that if I can remember it. Oh, here it is. So as part of CaptainHook, I can do this. My Composer JSON under the extra section. I can tell the CaptainHook plugin force install true. Now you're not going to see anything right now from this, but what happens now is that when you clone my repository, this is something I would share with my team. It's going to, instead of prompting them to install each hook individually, like you kind of saw it do for me, it's just going to install them. And this is a way of saying, hey, our team's going to follow these hooks. We're going to install all the hooks always, anytime you download the project. I'm doing this now on my open source projects too. I'll see how much it annoys people. I don't know. To answer the question about the imperative mood, it is, I'm going to botch this up. So I'm going to look up the definition, but it means it's an authoritative command. You're giving a command in the present tense. So instead of I updated this, it's update whatever. And it's sort of like a good way to think of the commit message in this case is once committed or once merged, this will blank. And then you finish the sentence. This will update the stuff, for example. So that's a good way to kind of think about it. I don't necessarily follow those rules on my personal projects. That's just kind of a default one for CaptainHook. I use the conventional commits kind of methodology or philosophy or whatever you want to call it. You can go look up conventional commits, and there's rules for that as well. So now with force install in my Composer.json, whenever someone downloads, it will install those hooks for them. We can take this a little further. Let's go into CaptainHook, because we've just seen it with hello. So I want to now say, let's say for every time I make a commit, I want it to, I just lost something here. Oh, action is the word I need. I want to, keyboard will work for me. I want to run Composerdev lint all, and that's going to run, that's a command that I've already set up with this DevTools plugin, and it will do syntax checking first, just to make sure there's no syntax errors, and then it will run PHP Code Sniffer. So that's one action I want to take. I'm going to do another action. Oh, let me pull in, actually, to show you what you can do with CaptainHook here. So there's a few things I'm going to show here. One thing is if my Composer.json is updated, I want to validate it. So why is it doing that? I know why, but all right. So I'm going to add an action here to validate Composer, and CaptainHook allows us to specify some conditions so that it doesn't always run. So in this case, I'm going to say if any file that is staged is in this list, in this case, it's just composer.json, I'm going to run composer to validate. Another thing that I want to do is I want to lint just the syntax. I'm going to split these up so that I can pass individual files to them. And in this case, you can see that when you create a plugin command, like this is the full command, dev lint syntax, I can pass other options to it. And in this case, it's actually proxying through the command through Composer to call out to an external program that I have. And then I want to pass it just the staged files. So if they're of type PHP, then I want to run this. And I also have that as a condition. So I'm going to try to speed through and grab the rest of these. So the idea here, though, is as we build up the workflows that we want our team to use, we can build all that into our process here and into our hooks and make them run. And here what I've done is I've added lint syntax, lint style, PHPStan and Psalm. And I'm separating them instead of putting them all into one command so that I'm able to do what you see right here with the staged files. I could easily just do this. You don't have to use my commands here. I'm copy pasting them from somewhere else, but I could easily do vendor ben Psalm, right? The same thing here. Vendor ben PHPStan. So it works just as well. The idea, though, is we're able to put it all together in a script that runs. And then in this case, I'm using CaptainHook to further kind of specify that I only want these to run on PHP files and only on the files that are staged. And then I'm not running tests on pre-commits here because sometimes that can get overburdensome, especially if you have a large test suite. So instead, I might do my tests on pre-push only. So that's what I'm going to show right here. So now I have said for my team, when we push code, we'll run composer test first. When we commit code, it will run all of these validations against our code to make sure that they have, you know, the proper syntax, that they have the proper style, that they've been statically analyzed, and they're not going to be broken. And there's other things we can do here. Actually, I've already put pre-push in here, so this is redundant. So there's other hooks we can use. You can use any of the hooks you want to use for your team. So let me do this. So I've modified these things. So you can see, I'm going to just add them. And actually, these only changed, composer.json and CaptainHook.json. So what you're going to see when the hooks run is that those other things that look for staged PHP files, they're not going to run at all. So we'll say git commit, and I have a syntax error in my composer. Oh, actually, I'm sorry, it's not syntax error. It is my lock file is not updated. So I can update my lock file now. That's because I made changes to it. All right, now I'll do git commit. Oh goodness, it must be a syntax error. Man, I really, really hate editing JSON in real time on the fly here. Let's see. Let's do. Oh, the description property is what? Really? Okay. I don't remember this being required before. Okay. I think we're good to commit now. So add that. Okay, so I'll say add Git Hooks, so the team does all the same things. Actually, that's interesting. Oh, I exceed. I had 51 characters. Goodness. Add Git Hooks, so the team does all the same things without a comma. So now it works. All right. So as you can see here, only Composer Validate ran because it matched the condition. The rest of these were skipped because there were no PHP files changed. So we have now seen, let's see. Try this. So let's recap. We've seen Composer scripts that we use to stitch together workflows that we can share with teams and contributors. We've seen using Composer plugins to combine workflows into commands that can be shared across projects. And then we've used CaptainHook to ensure that our team or our contributors follow those workflows seamlessly together. Excuse me. There are other things you can do as part of those hooks. My team, for example, has built in some extra checking so that if it fails a style thing, it doesn't stop you from proceeding. It in fact will take the changes. It will fix it for you during the commit, basically. And so those are ways to reduce friction on the rest of your team providing them with a better experience so that no one on your team has to really think about what your coding standards are. I mean, you can get into arguments about coding standards all day, but if you've got your tools kind of just fixing everything for you, then it never has to become part of a discussion. There should never be a message on a pull request that says this doesn't follow the coding standards, because in our case, at least, we've gotten rid of that. Like, it fixes it for you. The robots do it. And then, you know, we move on with our work and go on to the next thing. So this is a way to, like, you know, create those scripts that you need to run all the time, stitch those workflows together, share them across your teams, and then get everyone using them. So you can learn more by going to these links. And I'm going to actually wrap up by, and this will all be provided for you. So if you download the PDFs, all of these are clickable and will take you to their pages. I asked on Twitter a few weeks ago, you know, what are some of the coolest tools that you think are required in your development as part of kind of your workflow or your CI process? And I got a lot of suggestions. And I don't want to go through and talk about all of these, but I do want to point out a few of them, since I covered a few in this talk. Namely, I was using PHP Code Sniffer, Psalm, PHPStan, and PHPUnit, and CaptainHook. I do want to point out a few other things, especially since coding standards are kind of the sticking point with lots of people. And PHP Code Sniffer is not the only tool for coding standards. It's the tool that I use, but there is also PHP CS Fixer. I have that listed on this slide. And a lot of people love that tool, and that's their preference. So you could build PHP CS Fixer into the same kind of workflow. There are a lot of people also that, and this is something I'm interested in looking into, but I haven't done it yet. There is, on this slide, it's listed the Simplify Easy Coding Standard. What this does is it allows you to configure PHP Code Sniffer rules together with PHP CS Fixer rules. So you can take rules that you like from both and combine them, and then run one command to execute both of those. So I think that's a really interesting thing to take a look at. Let's see if I wanted to point out a few others here that people are, that I found interesting. So there's a lot of tools in here that will kind of help your team with their development environments. One's called Lando. I saw that it helps you kind of script up your development environment so everyone on your team can be using the same kind of environment stuff. It really just seems like a good wrapper around Docker type workflows. Let's see, there are security scanners in this list that are good. I will say check out the PHP Quality Assurance website. They've got a lot of more tools listed. 5 is another good thing to check out. I did mention them at the very beginning. There are other ways, other schools of thought for how you should install your development tools. And 5 provides a great alternative to what I've shown here. And let's see. And I've listed some coding standards in here. So that's a huge list right here. Lots of these are great. We're kind of out of time, but there's a lot more even at packages.org. Just go take a look through there. Just start searching for keywords. Search for Composer plugins like I was showing earlier, and find plugins that you think are going to help you do your job better. And that said, thank you very much for attending this presentation. I'm actually going to exit out of the slides because I can't see the Google Meet window with these still up. But again, I'll send Michael a link, and these can be shared around with the rest of your group at the end.